So this is a great opportunity and an opportunity for us to take during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, where every October we try to observe some of the best practices that individual citizens can put in place to reduce risk and really think about how they can improve the cybersecurity posture of their own personal assets, any institutions of higher education, or even industry that they're a part of. We are fortunate to have two individuals that will share some lessons learned with us. They have a data brief, Building the Cybersecurity Workforce Pipeline. It's a study of the National Centers of Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity. I'd like to welcome Ali Crawford and Luke Kosłowski. I almost got it right, Luke. I was close.
That was very close. I'll take that.
So there's an estimated 700,000 open cybersecurity positions. Investing in cybersecurity talent is critical to U.S. national and economic security posture. These shortfalls prompted a national cyber director to begin creating a national cybersecurity workforce and education strategy in the summer of 2022. The intent was to improve cyber talent and education. So the data brief that we've had an opportunity to take a look at, and hopefully those that are listening to this recording have read as well, was published by you as well as another author, Sarah Abdullah from Georgetown, with a goal of determining whether the designations of institutions in cybersecurity education are graduating cyber talent at a higher rate than schools without the designation. So what did you find? Are the designated schools doing better, worse, about the same?
Yeah, so that was our goal. And we found that so our data ran through 2020. We were using Department of Education graduation statistics through iPads. We found that NCAE designated schools were producing an outsized number of cyber and cyber-related graduates relative to non-designated schools. So NCAE institutions as of 2020 graduated about 40% of bachelor's degrees in all fields and about a quarter of all associate's degrees. But in cyber fields, they were graduating half of all cyber-related bachelor degrees and about a third of all associate's degrees. So we can't draw causation saying like NCAA schools designation caused them to graduate more, but you can definitely see a trend that they are graduating more. And not only that, but they've also been increasing their graduates at a rapid rate, especially compared to non-designated schools. So especially in associate's degrees from 2010 to 2020, associate's degrees in cyber-related fields actually fell in number of graduates, but at the same time, NCAC schools doubled the amount of associate's degrees that they graduated. And then in cyber-related bachelor's degrees, they actually tripled the amount of graduates in that time frame. So they're not only graduating more, an outsized share, but they're graduating them at an increasing rate as well.
Thank you for that. So I'm a graduate of Penn State, the Pennsylvania State University. We are their master's program. It's a designated program in cybersecurity and information assurance. And I was on the student side of that, not the administrative or educator side of that. So can you give us a little insight on the specific criteria and evidence that institutions need to provide when seeking the designation?
Yeah, so you'll forgive me if I miss some stuff. It's been a while since I wrote the report, and this is a bit of a weeds question, but I believe that when they're seeking, they're being the institution are seeking to receive their designation, they have to submit evidence to the program office, which is run out of the NSA, to validate that their curriculum meets the standards of the I think it's the NICE framework, and they have to submit faculty information, so they have to have a sufficient amount of faculty with the correct credentials, and their program has to have reached a certain level of maturity. So they have to have enough classes, they have to have enough faculty, it has to have been around for more than a year or two. And then if they meet that criteria, then they can apply for a CAE designation, which is just a little bit more administrative paperwork. There's also the research institutions, which I believe the Penn State Masters that's their designation. And they have a slightly different process. It's a little bit more rigorous and onerous. They have to provide evidence of significant cyber defense specific research, including research by both faculty and students, along with a threshold of funding that they receive, a number of publications that they've output, and a sufficient number of graduate students that have been enrolled in said program. So there's a two-tiered system, and it's a little bit more rigorous for the research institutions.
Thank you. I understand that. And that's even just more back end that I don't see. as a
Yeah.
student, right? Or someone, a member of the business community that's like, I need to hire some people for cyber. I need to send some of my employees for training. So thinking about if the juice is worth the squeeze, right? What might lead some top ranked institutions to believe that the administrative requirements for the designation outweigh the benefits, or is it everyone needs to contribute to the talent pool in their own way?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question that we also were interested in answering, and we didn't do any quantitative research on it, but we did have qualitative research as well as some anecdotal research from institutions that had chosen to become an NCAE member, and then those who had also not chosen. And Allie, add anything that I'm missing because you were involved in more of those conversations than I, but for some institutions, especially smaller institutions or like not top tier, if you will, the NCAE
Talk about
designation,
that after. Like,
this
let's talk about the
top
top tier
tier.
after.
I'm a
But
big proponent of not top tier universities, so that was said with love. But it can add a certain level of credibility and yeah, credibility to have that NSA government approved stamp saying this is a good program. It adds for students who are applying, for employers who are looking for students that come out of these programs, it adds some validation to their degree or certification. There's also institutions that have strong ties to the government, whether it's in and around the DMV area or who have research contracts with the DoD or DOE or NSA or whatever. This is another way of furthering that connection. And it signals to industry who also have those ties that this is a NSA specifically accredited program. On the other side of the spectrum, schools that have already have a large amount of faculty, already have a large amount of student base, already are graduating a lot of cyber talent, and are recognized as such. For them, in some cases, the added administrative hurdles wasn't worth the juice of the squeeze. One other thing on the programs that do decide to join, there's ancillary benefits to the accreditation. You become part of the community, right? So not only do you get this designation that shows that you're a strong program, but you also gain access to a community of schools who share best practices. They meet to do faculty development, and there's just a bunch of benefits of being part of the community that smaller schools or schools that don't have that existing community or network can take advantage of as well. Did I
thank
cover everything, Allie?
Yeah, that's essentially it. I think you can boil it all down to schools that apply, see the value in the prestige that comes with being designated by the NSA and its partners, the relationships that you build with the federal government, and then the funding and collaboration opportunities that Luke alluded to. And then on the flip side, the schools that don't apply, they don't see the perceived benefits of the prestige, or they don't necessarily need the funding opportunities or the collaboration opportunities. They believe that their institutions can exist without those anyways. And so it's just a matter of what institutions think are beneficial to them and their students.
you all both bring up a great point about the sense of community, even if it's just within the higher education community or with that lens. Thinking about the alignment to the NICE framework, this being Cybersecurity Awareness Month, this discussion happening just days prior to the launch of a special program that's going to focus on workforce development, educational pipelines. I'd like to talk a little bit about Pennsylvania proper. And that's just because we happen to have Ali in Pennsylvania. You're on the western side of the Commonwealth. I'm on the eastern side of the Commonwealth. I'm actually sitting in University City right now. So Drexel's here, actually in the same building as a Drexel program. Temple's down the street, Penn, etc. We're all here in a little close-knit hub. I hear so many great things about what Pitt is doing and Carnegie Mellon and what they're doing. What does this outlook in terms of the CAE designation look like for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? And how should we frame that for those that are looking for educational opportunities?
So I have some thoughts on this, but it's not necessarily specific to Pennsylvania. I know that was specifically what you're asking, but I only recently moved here. I'm born and raised West Virginian, so you will not find me cheering for Pitt.
Can't say that out loud.
You potentially could find me cheering for Penn State. My partner is a Penn State fan and went to Penn State, as did my uncle. So sometimes it's tangential. But what I can speak to, I think will answer your question in some way. So you mentioned that there's efforts now and anticipation and excitement building around building a cybersecurity workforce and building and increasing educational pipelines. And I want to speak just really briefly on the recent release of the National Cyber Workforce Education Strategy, because it prioritizes exactly what you're referencing, which is it's really prioritizing and encouraging this development of more like localized cyber ecosystems that serve the needs of communities rather than trying to prescribe like blanket policies. And I think this is a much needed and reinvigorated approach, actually, that understands like, yes, there are some unavoidable inequities in the systems, but also provides strategies for mitigating them. And that last component is where I think the NCAC system really fills in that gap, because there are a variety of subcommittees and sub-programs like within the NCAC community that are doing exactly this. Like they're working on building K through 12 cyber education pipelines and ecosystems, and a variety of different outreach efforts and like diversity and inclusion initiatives too. And so that's where I see the NCAC fitting. But I also think like the broader like federal efforts to increase and prioritize cyber education and workforce initiatives are really pushing for those like local regionalized ecosystems rather than just kind of this one size fits all approach.
I think that's really important as we move to a ever increasing connected world that seems to have an increasing number of vulnerabilities and vectors. We need to ensure that our youngest citizens understand some of the ways to protect themselves. So having that continuum of learning is something I'd like to continue to explore. So please send any recommendations my way in terms of programs or reports that we should educate ourselves on here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'd like to just open this up. Is there anything that you'd like people who've read the report to ask you about, or that you don't commonly get asked, but you think it's really important to mention?
Yeah, something that touches on your last point as well is that just because you stand up a program doesn't mean the graduates will have a job waiting for them afterwards. And also, just because you stand up a program doesn't mean that you're going to attract people from across different demographics that you might be wanting to attract, especially in STEM fields where there's a certain amount of gender inequity and all different types of inequity across the spectrum. So it's really important. So I'll go back to that. But on your point to sitting in a place where there's a bunch of universities and the benefits of that, so it really helps to generate critical mass, because if you have a bunch of universities who all have cyber programs, that is well known. You're going to get jobs that are brought there. People who need cyber workers are going to know to look there for them. People who live in that community will have heard of cyber work at a higher rate than in communities where cyber isn't such a heavy focus. So it really like brings people into the pipeline, and then it allows for industry to come in and know that there's a workforce there for them. If you're standing up a NCAE program in a location that doesn't have a bunch of schools like that, then you need some other type of way to get students into it and then have a landing spot for them afterwards. So South Dakota is a really good example where the state government invested heavily in the cybersecurity ecosystem. They brought in companies, they brought in workforce development boards, they brought in other state and education agencies to like create this community, if you will. And that's really important across STEM fields when you're trying to develop programs and increase the workforce, increase the training pipelines. You need to be able to make people aware of it from high school so that they can plan to get into these programs. And then you need funding to continue the programs and expand them. You need nonprofits to connect from industry to community colleges or four-year universities. It's this big ecosystem that requires a lot of players and a lot of coordination. And that's something we highlight in the report with some of the highlighted institutions, is that they do this really well. And the NCAE community is a resource to spread best practices. And that's one of the really strong benefits of it.
Thank you for that. Ali, you want the last word?
No, I just would really echo everything that Luke said is, and everything that he said to alluded to again, going back to the cyber education and workforce strategy. There really is this push now, I think, from the federal level to kind of create and build and maintain these localized cyber ecosystems for exactly the reasons that Luke mentioned, that it's almost like you're creating both a supply and a demand when you have education there, which is creating talent, which then creates kind of like a demand for those jobs that talent can fill. And so I think we're seeing that as the direction that policy is going, to create and enable these sort of ecosystems. And he brought up such a great example. Like South Dakota is so unique, is I think when you ask, if you ask the average person, where do you think like cyber innovation is happening, I doubt they would say South Dakota. And I say that as somebody from a small state that I think often gets overlooked. But they're doing really incredible things there. And Luke, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think South Dakota only has two NCAC designated institutions, maybe three. And even then, those schools are producing, I think, over 50% of that state's entire cyber talent. And that speaks to like the how the initiatives are working. It speaks to what the program, it's actually meeting its goals. And that doesn't require an awful lot to meet those goals either. And so I would just, yeah, echo everything that Luke said.
It's one school, South
That's
Dakota
even better.
University.
That's what I thought, but I also didn't want to be wrong. But I mean, that's again, it's just South Dakota, or it's Dakota State University doing all these incredible things, and it's just one major institution in that ecosystem, right? So it doesn't take an awful lot to create those sort of ecosystems that enable workforce development.
I will add one last thing, so I can have the last word, Ellie. But the other great thing about cyber and the NCAA is that it allows for training of different tiers of talent. Because like Pittsburgh Technical College is a 2-year institution, and the good thing about the NICE framework is not only does it allow for the creation of standardized curriculum, but it also allowed for the creation of certificates that have market value. In 2-year institutions, you can get an associate's with a certificate, and you know what kind of job you're going to have afterwards. So it's a really strong benefit where you can have 2-year institutions that are training talent into good jobs. You can also have 4-year institutions that are training talent for different jobs, but that are also great. You can also have master's and PhD programs that are all aligned to the shared curriculum and competencies and work roles. So that's all I'll say on that.
Well, I appreciate both of your time. Thank you, Luke. Welcome to the Commonwealth. Ali, from the Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology. Again, take a moment, take a look at least the executive summary of this data brief, Building the Cybersecurity Workforce Pipeline, a study of the National Centers of Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity. Thanks again, and we'll talk about this soon.